Thanks for coming back to What the Heck is Happening in HR. And today, it's an oldie but a goodie. We're going to talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act. I mean, what could possibly go wrong in your organization with it? For our podcast disclaimer, please visit the episode description. Thanks for coming back to What the Heck is Happening in HR, and we're going to talk about that Fair Labor Standards Act. It started off in 1932, and finally President FDR signed it in 1938, actually June 25th. So we could have a big day to celebrate this, but we have a lot happening with it, and we need to talk about it. And that's because there's been some changes, big changes in some of the regulations. And what got me putting this back on our recording list is because I had a business owner share with me his big idea as to how he was going to work around this. So I want to talk about it. This issue that I'm going to talk about with Fair Labor Standards is around exemptions. And I want to be sure that you know that this pertains to most employees, certainly not fire protection or law enforcement. They have their own kind of special rules around it. There's Department of Transportation rules around it because you have people who are working full shifts or they're on airplanes or things like that, or healthcare or on commission. So we're just going to talk about kind of the vanilla part of Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. It did some amazing things. I mean, it did establish a work week. It established a minimum wage. It did establish that there would be overtime over a work week. Best thing I think it probably did was to make sure that child labor laws were in place. I mean, we had kids who didn't go to school or kids who were forced to go to work and lose their lives working machinery or doing things that they just should not have been doing. It was such an appropriate time to have that happen. It also takes into effect employee record keeping and how we keep records. You might have a state or you might have employees in a state where you need to pay attention to these items as well. And so you want to be sure you're paying attention to all of your state regulations. So, Fair Labor Standards Act. We're going to talk about jobs. Majority of the jobs will be what we consider non-exempt. They are not exempt from being paid overtime if they work over 40 hours in a week, and they are not exempt to being minimum wage. So this gets really messed up when people start mixing pay methods as a term for exempt and non-exempt status. They're two different things. So they might say, well, I'm just going to pay him a salary. Well, that's great. But if the job is non-exempt, and we'll talk about that in a minute, paying them a salary and having them work hours that brings their weekly wage below minimum wage is a violation. And if you haven't paid them overtime, it's a violation. So you can pay non-exempt employees a salary, but it doesn't mean you don't pay them for overtime. And they end up with a fluctuating minimum wage. And so you need to really, really pay attention to that. So let's talk about FLSA and exemptions. So there are three things that make a position exempt. And it's not one or the other, it's all three. The first one is they must be paid a salary, a weekly salary. And that was just put in, that was put in a long time ago, but it was also really reinforced with a Supreme Court ruling where an oil rigger who was paid a day rate, it was determined that, you know what, he's non-exempt. Even though he's out there on the oil rig and he's getting a big day rate and he made over $200,000, he's really a non-exempt employee and was not protected. So it's a pretty big deal. So it's a weekly wage, and that wage must be of a certain threshold. It used to be $4.55. It's now $6.84, and on July 1st, it goes to $8.44, which those of you calculating means it's about $43,888. So what's that mean? So if you have somebody that makes $800 a week and you think they're an exempt employee because they were an exempt employee, it was more than that 684, they will no longer be an exempt employee just because of that salary threshold. Since we're on thresholds, let's talk about them further. That change is July 1st, 2024. The next change, yes, there's another one, January 1st, 2025. Right, you have nothing else to do at the holidays than to make sure all of this gets done prior to that. But it's an important item because it's a big jump. We will be jumping from $844 to $1,128 a week. So that means, those of you calculating, $58,656 a year, but paid in this weekly salary. So they must receive a weekly salary. They must receive one of those thresholds, either the current 684, the July 1st 844, or January 1st 1128, and their job must pass a duties test. And the most common exemptions are administrative, executive, and professional. The administrative is the one that's the trickiest because it really says, oh, you're going to make decisions of using independent judgment on items of significance. What does that mean? I mean, signing a contract for my little boutique company is very different than signing a contract where you're doing a checklist from the procurement department at Microsoft. So job title might be the same job title, but one could be non-exempt and one could be exempt. So it isn't just by job title. One other little item you should know is that this is going to be ongoing now. So this is going to have a 3-year look of refreshing of that number, which on January 1st will be $1,128 per week. It will be refreshed every 3 years and be able to look back. So make sure you are talking with someone about FLSA, making sure you have an HR professional, your employment attorney involved with it. And just one other little note on FLSA. A lot of times folks think that, you're required to give me vacation. You're required to give me holiday. You're required to give me PTO. You're required to give me benefits. You must give me a raise. You've got to give me rest. All of that might be in state law, but it's not under the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act is enacted through the Wage and Hour Division, or enforced, I guess I should say, through the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor. It's really important to understand because if you end up not following these rules, that will result in fines, back wages, all sorts of stuff that could happen. Just read the Wage and Hour Division newsroom. They have news releases every single day about it. Other thing is that let's just say that you have a position and you didn't move it properly, or you decided to change titles, which that's what my business owner who called me said, I'm just going to make them all managers. They'll like the title and I just won't have to pay them overtime. Titles don't matter in this. It's that 3-legged stool. It is a salary, a weekly salary of a certain threshold that I've shared with you, and then the duties test, all 3 items. But you might have a situation where you are going to impact a protected class, perhaps minorities, perhaps women, perhaps people over 40. And so now you're going to have a separate charge of discrimination from the EEOC. Don't fool around with this. Get on it. Get working on it. And you should have been working on it because you have been listening to what the heck is happening in HR. And we've been talking about this coming for some time. We hope that you'll be back on Monday to learn even more.